Once there was, and yet there wasn't, and yet there was an audience. That's you. You're essential, for me anyway, because otherwise I'm just talking to chairs and light fittings. But for you guys, it's a little bit more complicated. Why do you need a storyteller like me? And why should you tell more stories yourselves? Well, I am going to be honest with you. It is a bit of a long story. When you fall in love with something, whether it's a person or an art form or an equation, you want to tell everyone about it. When I first started telling people about stories, I was convinced that the problem was that they didn't have enough stories in their lives. After all, the kind of thing that I call storytelling, just a teller and an audience and a plan, not really a script, isn't something that a lot of people know about. Lots of people would have read versions of oral stories, whether they're about Kurra the Water Rat or King Arthur, but not many would have heard them told. No matter what your background, we don't have to go very far at all to find a time when we were all living in an oral culture. But in spite of this, if you ask most people about oral storytelling, they'll have trouble getting much further than Cinderella. But I've been thinking, okay, never mind that. I've been thinking, and I've decided that the problem isn't too few stories in our lives. Sometimes it's story overload. We swim in stories every day. TV series, Facebook updates, and that random person at work who keeps telling you about their dog. But the stories that I'm talking about, they taste different. And even although you tell stories every single day, you may not have stopped to think about how powerful they can be or what you can do with them. Stories are like lightning. Like lightning, they can connect us, and like lightning, they can split us in two. And the difference between the stories that I'm talking about and the stories that you tell almost without thinking, it's not that the stories that I'm talking about are all old. Because I tell stories about the time I thought there was a skeleton under the veranda in grade 2, and the kebab that saved my life in Berlin in 2010. So first we're going to talk about what makes stories work, and then we're going to tell one. Some of you might have noticed that I said we, not I, but don't worry, I have done this before. So what do I actually mean when I say that stories can taste different? I've come up with four thoughts. 1, they give you space to focus. They give you at least 10 or 15 minutes when you don't have to think about whether you've paid the phone bill or what you're going to have for dinner. 2, and this is pretty important, they give you an opportunity to be both inside and outside of your life at the same time. Because stories use archetypal characters like queens or turtles, you might find that they have something to say to you, even if it's only that even the worst experiences can have a beginning and a middle and an end. 3, they are not a cheesy public service announcement. They do not all end happily, and they don't all agree with each other. For every story that tells you that you need to act quickly to solve a problem, there's another story that tells you you really shouldn't interfere in case you make the problem worse. It has to be said that not every story reflects well on the messy lives that we live as human beings. Some of them are cringingly racist, sexist, and homophobic. But since stories are told afresh every time, then every aspect of storytelling is about choice. What's the right story for this audience at this time? What does it say about people and the land? Which jokes are this audience going to enjoy? It's no wonder that storytellers from places as different as Scotland and Cape York placed restrictions on who can tell some stories and when. And 4, sometimes the story knows more than you do. 2 years ago in Sydney, I was about to perform at a storytelling festival. The story that I had chosen was called The Foolish King. It's by Terry Jones. I thought I'd chosen it because it's fun. People throw dictionaries around in it. They swing off chandeliers. But it wasn't until I was walking out onto stage that I realised that it's really a story about falling in love and about that awkward moment where you meet someone's family. I was about to go home to Brisbane and have coffee with my partner and his mum for the first time. So clearly I needed to tell a story where everything came out well. Oh, just in case you're wondering, coffee went fine. So I got my happy ending in real life as well. Now before I go any further, I should get one thing straight, which is that I love books. I own hundreds of them, and I'm even trying to write one. But the fact is that storytelling is not reading aloud. And it's not even working from a script, really, or checking from palm cards. And a lot of people ask me how I remember the stories. Traditional stories, particularly, are structured to be easy to remember. There's often 3 sisters, or 7 brothers, or 8 brothers that you can follow through a process. But there's something else I'd like to suggest. And it's this. Sometimes when you find a story in a collection, you'll find that it's kind of been abbreviated and squashed out of shape. But it's well worth thinking about it if you enjoy the story, thinking about untangling what's actually going on. Where does the story happen? Who's in the story? What do they want? What happens first? And after that, and after that, and after that. And if you write 1 or 2 words on a piece of paper and make that piece of paper into a paper chain, you can create the perfect prompt. Exactly because it doesn't fit many words on the pieces means you can't get stuck reading sentences off a sheet. And you will eventually get to the point where you can put the chain down. Stories lead to more stories. In the Middle East, there is a storytelling character called Mullah Nasruddin Hoxha. He's very funny and very wise. And when you tell one of his stories, you're supposed to tell 7. That's not because the storyteller's supposed to like the sound of their own voice. It's because there's so many stories about him, and they're so well known, that as soon as one person finishes one, the next person straight away jumps in. Oh, have you heard the one about the day that Nasruddin lost his donkey? I've been really privileged to work on lots of projects that use stories in various forms to connect people. Once, I worked on a project in Annerley and Maruka, which used stories about ordinary objects like the teaspoon I bought in Adelaide in 1952, or the first pair of shoes I bought when I came to Australia, to connect people. I heard a lot of stories during that project. Stories from people who'd lived in the area for decades and recently arrived migrants and refugees. As a lot of you are probably aware, refugees don't often like to talk about their own story, and sometimes they don't even want you to talk about exactly which country they've originally come from. I heard a lot of stories that I couldn't share with anyone, not even people working on the same project. So one day I asked a man from West Africa to tell me a story that I could share. He sat back comfortably in his chair and he said, "When I was a boy, a friend and I went out to the shops. On the way, we had to cross a river, and in the middle of the river, there was a beautiful, bare-chested mermaid. We looked into her eyes, and then all of a sudden, we found we couldn't look away. I lost my balance. I fell into the river, and he showed me the scar on his arm. He told me how blood had gushed into the water. I wondered what actually had happened. And I had to get a police report, he said, to get treatment at the local hospital. But when I went to the police and told them about the mermaid, they just laughed in my face. I asked him how he thought the story should end, and he said, "My question for the people of Australia is this: have you ever had a day like that?" And for me, that was the moment when his story fit in with all the other stories I'd been hearing. And I realised what kind of day he was talking about. The day where you get up, get dressed, and go to do something completely ordinary, and somewhere along the line, you face a threat. And the people who should be helping you, they laugh in your face. Maybe you have had a day like that. Or maybe you haven't. I don't know. But anyway, let's tell a story. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a few people for one word out of the audience, and I'm going to start the story, and then, because we won't have time to tell the whole story, I'll leave it to you in the break to finish. And that means that you can all decide different endings. And tonight, when you get home and somebody asks you what you did today, you can tell them the story. So, first of all, we need a place for this story to happen. Has anybody got a place for me? Please just yell it out. Japan! Okay, great. Thank you. And we need a character to be in the story, at least one.
Asparagus.
Oh. Asparagus! Talking asparagus, that is exactly right. What does this asparagus want?
A teddy bear.
A teddy bear, exactly. Now, the asparagus, she felt that she was a good auntie. She was the kind of auntie who let her nephews and nieces stay up just a little bit later than they would have otherwise. She was the kind of auntie who stole them the good paper clips out of the work stationery cupboard. She was the kind of auntie who you could tell a secret to and know that it wouldn't be passed on to your mum. So when this auntie went on holidays to Japan, she slit an extra pocket into the side of her shoot of asparagus dress, and specifically thought that she really needed to bring home a teddy bear. Because if any of you have travelled, you'll know that it doesn't matter how old you are, when you're talking about having lived in different countries and spent time in different places, you always end up talking about things that you enjoy as kids, like lollies and teddy bears. So she figured that Japanese teddy bears would have to be completely amazing. And the first place she went to look for a teddy bear was a strip mall in the middle of Tokyo. And as she was walking down the shopping centre, she heard an unexpected noise. What was it? A scream. A scream, that is exactly right. It was a blood-curdling scream. Ah! And when she looked in the window of the closest shop, she saw one of the shop assistants with a teddy bear on his head jumping onto a trampoline. Going, going, going. And the teddy bear flew up through the window and into her arms. And she looked down at it, and it said, oh, somebody, what did it say? Just give it a couple of words.
Take me home.
Take me home! And she said, okay, I guess you're it then. But her trouble had only just started, because the teddy bear started to give her lots of requirements for where he was going to live. He said, I have to live in a place where there's a blue alarm clock. I have to eat tomato every morning at 3:35, and I have to have a constant supply of blue tack. Now, I'm going to leave that story with you. I've left you with a bit of a problem. Can I suggest that being asparagus might have something to do with the solution? But I'll leave it to you. Thanks very much.